The Grand Conclave of the Galactic Council was a chamber designed to inspire awe and diminish the self. Carved from the heart of a rogue planetoid, its ceiling was a swirling nebula of captured gases, casting shifting, divine light upon the delegates below. 137 species were represented, each at their designated plinth, a testament to a union that had maintained peace for over 6,000 standard years. There were the Silans, crystalline beings of pure thought who communicated in shimmering cascades of light. The Grok, immense, stone-like creatures whose deliberations were subsonic rumbles that vibrated through the chamber floor. The Gossamer Flinth, who hovered in columns of contained gas, their anxieties expressed through the frantic fluttering of their cilia. It was a place of ancient protocol, of predictable debate, of unassailable order. All of that ended the day the human arrived. He did not arrive with the fanfare of a new member species. There was no grand fleet, no formal announcement broadcast across the star lanes. He simply appeared, brought in by a small, unmarked courier vessel that docked at a tertiary bay. His name, the record stated, was Elias Thorne, and he was the designated ambassador of a species called humanity from a star system named Sol. The data stream on his species was conspicuously sparse, a chaotic jumble of history filled with as much sublime art as it was with savage, self-inflicted violence. The Council's analysts were baffled by the contradictions. His entrance into the conclave was a study in anticlimax. The great doors, forged from a collapsed neutron star, hissed open and he walked in. Alone. He was bipedal, bilaterally symmetrical, a common enough configuration. He wore simple, dark fabric that absorbed the chamber's nebular light, making him a void in the otherwise vibrant hall. He was not large like a Grok, nor shimmering like a Silan. He was unremarkable, and that was the first and most profound horror. In a hall of wonders, his sheer, unadorned simplicity was an aberration. He walked to the newly installed human plinth, his steps neither hurried nor slow, the soft sound of his footfalls an alien rhythm in a hall accustomed to the scuttling, slithering, and thudding of 1,000 different biologies. He reached his place and stood, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He did not look up at the glorious nebula, nor did he gawk at the assembled delegates. He simply watched, his head turning in small, deliberate arcs. His face was a mask of placid neutrality, but his eyes, they were the second horror. They were a pale, washed-out blue, yet they seemed to possess an unnerving depth. They did not just see, they assessed. They deconstructed. When his gaze passed over a delegate, they felt not observed, but known, as if their genetic history, their personal fears, and their political ambitions were being downloaded and filed away in an instant. The day's agenda was a trade dispute between the arboreal Lorians and the subterranean digits over mining rights on a shared moon. It was a tedious but necessary process, governed by statutes written eons ago. Delegate Parn of the Lorians was in the midst of a long, impassioned speech, his leafy fronds quivering with righteous indignation. And the digits, in their rapacious greed, have violated the subcrustal demarcation line for the 7th time this cycle. We have the seismic readings. It is an affront to this council and a betrayal of the Accords of Xanth. Normally, this would be followed by a rebuttal from the Digite delegate, a flurry of procedural motions, and eventually the formation of a subcommittee. It was the way of things. But today the conclave was distracted. Whispers, transmitted through psionic links, light pulses and pheromonal bursts rippled through the chamber. Did you see its eyes? A Flinth transmitted, its cilia vibrating in a high-frequency terror. It is flesh, rumbled a Grok, a deep note of disgust in its subsonic voice. Soft, unprotected, a predator's form but with the posture of a scholar. The dissonance is unsettling. The Silan delegate Lumina pulsed a cool, analytical thought to its neighbor. The data on their species is paradoxical. They have composed symphonies that map the mathematical beauty of creation. They have also developed over 1,000 methods for killing members of their own kind, many of them requiring intimate, personal proximity. How can both be true? Xyler of the Cathar felt a hot surge of contempt. He was a warrior, a general, a politician second. His species was bipedal like the human, but there the similarity ended. Xyler was encased in a chitinous exoskeleton the color of burnished bronze. His mandibles clicked softly as he watched the human stand in perfect, unnerving stillness. The Cathar valued strength, directness, and unambiguous honor. This human, this Elias Thorn, was an embodiment of everything they despised. Subtlety, silence, and an aura of hidden intent. He was a shadow, a creature of deceit. Xyler could feel it in the marrow of his bones. The council president, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline lattice, finally addressed the newcomer. Ambassador Thorn of Humanity, the Galactic Council welcomes you. Is it your wish to address the conclave? A low hum filled the chamber as universal translators spun up, ready to process the human's language. Thorn's head inclined slightly. A gesture of respect, deference. It was impossible to tell. His voice, when it came, was smooth and even without any discernible accent the translators could place. Thank you, Mr. President. I have no wish to disrupt the current proceedings. I'm here to observe and to learn. Just that, nothing more. No grand pronouncements, no declarations of friendship, no staking of a claim in the galactic order. I am here to observe and to learn. It sounded so humble, yet in the charged atmosphere, it felt like the most profound threat the conclave had ever heard. An observer is a judge in waiting. A learner is a student of weakness. The debate resumed, but the energy had been leached from it. Delegate Parn's speech faltered. The Digite rebuttal was unfocused. Every delegate, no matter how powerful or ancient their lineage, was acutely aware of the still, dark figure standing at the human plinth. They felt his eyes on them, felt his silent judgment. He was doing nothing, and in doing nothing, he was dominating the entire chamber. Later, in the private corridors and energy conduits that connected the delegates' quarters, the talk was of nothing else. He does not even use a translation node, chirped a delegate from a species of avian descent. The sounds he makes are perfectly modulated for the universal system. It implies a mastery of galactic common tongue that takes most species decades to achieve. It's the stillness, Xyler said, his voice a harsh rasp. He was speaking to a small group of delegates from other martial races, beings who understood the language of power and threat. No predator is that still unless it is about to strike. He is coiled, waiting. But for what? Lumina, the Silen, approached their group, its crystalline form radiating a gentle blue light. Perhaps you misunderstand, it pulsed. Stillness is not always a prelude to attack. It can also be a state of perfect balance, or perfect emptiness. Emptiness is a vacuum, Xyler countered, his mandibles clicking sharply. And a vacuum is always filled. I do not trust him. I do not trust his species. Their history is a litany of broken trust and self-immolation. Why should we believe they would treat us any differently? The next day, Thorn's subtle disruption continued. During a complex discussion on gravimetric shear vectors in a contested shipping lane, he waited for a pause and then asked, "Has anyone considered the psychological impact on the navigators who must traverse this region? The constant stress of potential annihilation must surely lead to errors." The chamber fell silent. The debate had been about physics, economics, and territorial rights. It was a matter of numbers and laws. Thorn had, with a single question, made it about the trembling hand of a pilot, the fear of a lonely being in the dark. It was irrelevant. It was illogical. And yet, it changed the entire texture of the conversation. The delegates, for the first time, were forced to consider the living, breathing beings affected by their sterile equations. Some were moved. Others, like Xyler, were disgusted. It was emotional manipulation of the highest order. The incident that cemented the growing dread occurred in the third cycle. A young Flinth aide, skittering with a tray of nutrient gels, stumbled near the human plinth. The tray clattered to the floor, splattering a viscous, amber fluid near Thorn's feet. The Flinth froze, its cilia retracting in sheer terror. Public failure was a deep cultural shame for its people, often resulting in self-imposed exile. It awaited rebuke, a formal complaint, anything. Thorn did not move for a long moment. Then he knelt. The motion was fluid, economical. He produced a simple cloth from his clothing and began to wipe the gel from the polished floor. He did not speak. The silence was deafening. After cleaning the spot, he rose and looked at the terrified Flinth. "Your nest mother would be proud of your diligence," Thorn said, his voice quiet enough that only those nearby could hear. "The tremor in your third appendage, it is a sign of great care, not fear. You strive for perfection. That is an admirable trait. The Flinth quivered, not with fear, but with a profound, soul-shaking shock. No one outside its species knew the significance of the third appendage tremor. It was an involuntary reaction tied directly to their species' obsessive-compulsive drive for familial honor. It was a secret shame, a sign of inner turmoil. For this alien, this human, to not only notice it but to reframe it as a virtue was an act of perception, so intimate it was tantamount to a violation. The story spread through the conclave like a contagion. This was not a politician. This was not a diplomat. This was something else. He could see into their hearts, pluck their deepest insecurities, and either soothe them or, they now feared, twist them into weapons. The unease that had permeated the council hardened into a cold, sharp-edged fear. They were 1,000 ancient races, mighty and proud, and they were all terrified of one quiet man who saw too much. Xyler watched it all, a slow burn of fury building in his core. He saw the other delegates becoming cowed, their ancient pride eroding under the human's silent, knowing gaze. Thorn was a poison, a psychological plague. He was dismantling the council not with weapons or threats, but with whispers and empathy, the most insidious tools of all. The Cathar had a saying, "A hidden blade is deadlier than a screaming army." Elia's thorn was a blade hidden in plain sight. Xyler knew what he had to do. He would not allow this fear to fester. He would not stand by while this soft-skinned manipulator unmade a 6,000-year peace with his quiet words and unnerving eyes. He would challenge the human. He would force the shadow into the light and expose it for the empty thing it was. It was a matter of honor. It was a matter of survival. He would invoke the right of unveiling, an ancient Cathar custom, a duel not of bodies but of souls. In the crucible of the rite, all truths were laid bare. He would break the human or be broken himself. And in his warrior's heart, Xyler of the Cathar had no doubt which it would be. The tension in the grand conclave grew thicker with each passing cycle. Elia's thorn's presence had become a gravitational anomaly, warping the normal flow of politics and discourse around him. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were like precisely thrown stones into a placid pond, sending ripples of thought and doubt through the assembled delegates. He never argued policy or debated law. Instead, he would inquire about the historical anxieties of the species involved, or the philosophical underpinnings of their traditions. He was a political analyst who operated on the level of civilizational psychology, and it was rendering the Council's millennia-old methods obsolete. Xyler saw this as the ultimate corruption. The Council was built on a foundation of logic, precedent, and the clear-eyed assessment of material reality. Thorn was attempting to rebuild it on a mire of feelings, fears, and abstract notions. He was dissolving the bedrock of their union. The Cathar general watched as Thorn spoke quietly with a Grok elder, not about territorial claims, but about the Grok concept of generational memory and how it might cause them to perceive new treaties as echoes of ancient betrayals. He saw Thorn share a moment of silent communion with Lumina, the Silan, their exchange of light patterns so complex and nuanced that it looked less like a conversation and more like the co-creation of a work of art. Each interaction was a victory for the human and another crack in the foundation of Xyler's world. His people, the Cathar, had earned their place on the council through strength, through unwavering resolve, through an honor code so rigid it was inscribed into their very genetics. They were the bulwark against chaos, and Thorn was chaos personified, cloaked in the guise of placid reason. Xyler's decision solidified during a debate over the quarantine of the Cygnus Veil, a volatile nebula prone to unpredictable reality fluxes. The consensus, led by the pragmatic and cautious races, was to erect a permanent energy barrier around it, declaring it a no-entry zone for all time. It was the safe, logical choice. When the president asked for any final objections, Thorn's calm voice filled the chamber. "A cage is a statement," he said softly. "It defines what is within as dangerous as monstrous. It teaches fear. The ships that pass it for the next 10,000 years will teach their young, do not go there, there be dragons. And the veil, which is now merely a phenomenon of physics, will become a legend, a thing of dread. What you contain, you give power. What you cage, you make a god or a devil." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the delegates. Is that the legacy you wish to create, a monument to your own fear? The speech was a masterpiece of psychological deflection. It offered no alternative solution, no scientific data, no logistical plan. It simply reframed the entire issue, transforming a practical safety measure into a profound philosophical choice about the nature of fear itself. Zyler could feel the resolve of several key delegates wavering. He saw the seed of doubt Thorne had planted beginning to sprout. That was the final straw. This could not continue. Zyler rose to his full, imposing height, his bronze carapace seeming to draw all the nebular light in the chamber to it. The soft clicking of his mandibles silenced all other whispers. "This is not a debate of philosophy," Zyler's voice boomed, amplified by his plinth. It was a voice accustomed to commanding armies, a voice that could cut through the roar of battle. "It is a matter of safety, of protecting the lives of countless beings from a known, quantifiable threat. This human, this ambassador, would have us risk lives to avoid hurting the feelings of a gas cloud." A murmur of agreement went through the more pragmatic factions. Thorne simply watched Zyler, his expression unchanged. "He speaks in riddles and shadows because he has no substance," Zyler continued, pointing a sharp, three-fingered hand at the human. "He plucks at our fears because he has no strength to offer. He is a whisper in the dark, a pestilence of the mind that weakens our resolve and clouds our judgment. I will not see this council, this great bastion of order, crumble into indecision because we are afraid of a ghost." Zyler took a step forward, away from the safety of his plinth. The air crackled with tension. "I, Zyler, General of the Third Swarm, Delegate of the Cathar Imperium, invoke the right of unveiling." A collective gasp went through the conclave. The right was an archaic tradition, from a time when disputes were not settled by committees but by a direct contest of will. It was not a physical duel. It was far more brutal. It was a psychic and intellectual vivisection, a public dismantling of an opponent's core beliefs, their history, their very identity, until one of them was left with nothing. It was rarely invoked and never against a new species. To do so was the ultimate expression of contempt and distrust. The council president's energy field shimmered with agitation. "Delegate Zyler, this is highly irregular. Ambassador Thorne is new to our ways." "Let him learn them," Zyler snapped. "If he is worthy of a seat in this chamber, he is worthy of its traditions. I challenge him to prove his substance, to face me not with cryptic whispers, but with the full measure of his being. Let the truth of humanity be laid bare for all to see. Unless, of course, he is a coward." All eyes turned to Elias Thorne. The chamber was so quiet that the faint hum of the life support systems sounded like a roar. Here was the confrontation everyone had been dreading and, on some level, craving. The human was finally being called out, forced from the shadows. They expected him to refuse, to hide behind diplomatic immunity. They expected him to show fear. Thorne's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was not a smile of amusement, but of profound, ancient sadness. "If you believe it is necessary, Delegate Zyler," he said, his voice as calm as a deep, cold lake, "then I accept." The acceptance was more shocking than the challenge. The human's placid agreement was devoid of anger, pride, or fear. It was the calm of a man walking to a predetermined fate. It unnerved Zyler more than any boastful threat could have. For the first time, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced the armor of his certainty. He ignored it. He had to. Honor demanded it. The right was held in the Chamber of Echoes, a stark, circular room deep in the heart of the station. The walls were made of a matte black material that absorbed all light and sound, ensuring no distractions. In the center were two simple chairs. There was no audience physically present. The other delegates would watch via holographic relay, their presence a silent, judgmental pressure. Zyler entered first, his steps confident and heavy. He sat, his posture rigid, a fortress of honor and conviction. Thorne entered a moment later, his movements as quiet and deliberate as ever. He sat opposite Zyler, his hands resting on his knees. He looked, Zyler thought, with a flash of contempt, like a patient waiting for a physician. A neutral arbiter, a being of pure sound, chimed a single, clear note to signal the beginning of the rite. Zyler began, his voice a powerful weapon. "You represent a species of contradictions, human. You create beauty that can make a Scylan weep, yet you slaughter each other over strips of land and differing ideologies. You reach for the stars, yet you poison your own cradle. Your existence is a paradox. You have no core, no single truth. How can a being from such a fractured people claim to offer wisdom to a stable, ordered galaxy? Thorn did not answer immediately. He simply held Xyler's gaze. "You are correct," he said finally. "We are fractured. It is the source of our greatest weakness and our greatest strength. A monolith can only stand or fall. A web of contradictions can bend, adapt, and endure anything. Endure? You have endured by turning your violence outward. Your history is one of conquest. You dominate, you consume. You are a predator species. You see this council not as a gathering of peers, but as a new hunting ground." Xyler leaned forward, pressing his attack. "All life consumes to live," Thorn replied, his voice still maddeningly even. "You consume minerals from the earth. The Lorians consume light from their sun. We consume ideas, possibilities. Is one so different from the other? You see a predator, I see a survivor. We survived our own worst impulses. We stared into the abyss of our own making and chose to step back from the edge. Do not mistake our capacity for violence for a desire for it. There is a profound difference between a weapon that is sheathed and one that has never been forged." Xyler scoffed. "Honor is a weapon that is always forged, always ready. My people live by a code. It gives us strength, purpose. It is the foundation of our civilization. What is your foundation, human? Expediency? Survival at any cost? There is no honor in that." And here the duel turned. Thorn's gaze seemed to intensify, to penetrate. "Honor," Thorn repeated the word as if tasting it for the first time. "It is a beautiful concept. A fortress of rules to keep the chaos out. Tell me, General Xyler, what chaos does your fortress keep at bay?" Xyler's mandibles clicked in agitation. "It is not about keeping things at bay. It is a guide to right action. A path that is straight and narrow," Thorn said. "No room for deviation. It must be comforting, to never have to choose, only to follow the code." But was it the code that guided you during the culling of the weak on Cathar Prime, 500 generations ago, when the atmospheric processors failed and your ancestors had to choose which clutches would receive the filtered air and which would be left to choke on the dust? The blow was staggering. The culling was a dark age in Cathar history, a shameful secret they never spoke of. It was a time when honor had failed, when survival had been bought at a terrible price. It was not in any of the public records available to a new species. "How do you?" Xyler began, his voice losing its booming confidence. "It is in your biology," Thorn said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, more hypnotic. "It is in the faint tremor in your secondary manipulator when you are under stress. A vestigial fear response, passed down through generations, from an ancestor who had to make an impossible choice. Your rigid honor code, it is not a monument to your strength, General. It is a scar, a desperate attempt to ensure you never have to make a choice like that again. You have built a cage of rules around a terrified heart." Thorn leaned forward, his pale blue eyes seeming to hold all the sorrow of the universe. "You speak of my species' contradictions, but you cannot even face your own. You preach strength, but your entire society is a reaction to a moment of profound weakness." Xyler felt his breath catch in his thoracic vents. The chamber suddenly felt cold, the black walls pressing in. Thorn's words were not just an argument, they were an invasion. "And you, Xyler," Thorn continued, his voice now a near whisper that cut through Xyler's defenses like a monomolecular blade. "You, the great general, the bastion of Cathar honor, why do you cling to it so fiercely? What are you personally so afraid of?" "I fear nothing," Xyler snarled, a desperate, reflexive defense. "Don't you?" Thorn's voice was gentle, filled with a terrible, piercing empathy. "You don't fear the memory of your younger clutch brother, the one they called Vec, the small, frail one. He died of the crimson lung fever. You were there. You were young but already strong, the pride of your clutch, but you couldn't fight a fever. You couldn't command a disease to retreat. All your strength, all your budding honor was useless as you watched him struggle for breath. You stood there helpless." Xyler's mind reeled. Vec. No one knew that name, he had never spoken it. It was a memory locked in the deepest, most guarded vault of his soul. He could feel the smooth, hot shell of his brother's carapace under his hand, could hear the wet, rattling sound of his breathing. "You built your fortress of honor around the memory of a helpless child," Thorn concluded, his voice an echo of Xyler's own ancient grief. "The one you couldn't save. Every battle you win, every enemy you vanquish is a desperate attempt to prove to that memory that you are no longer helpless. Your honor is not a guide. It is an atonement. And it will never be enough." That was the moment Xyler broke. It was not a sound he made. It was a feeling. A great load-bearing pillar at the center of his being turned to dust. His honor, his purpose, his identity. It was all revealed to be a lie. A beautifully constructed, elaborate lie to hide the simple, shameful terror of a boy who could not save his brother. He looked at Thorn, and for the first time he truly saw him. He saw the immense, crushing weight of a species that lived with this level of self-awareness every single day. Humans had no code, no fortress to protect them from the truth of themselves. They simply endured it. And in that moment, Xyler understood what Thorn had meant by a sheathed weapon. He was not looking at a diplomat. He was looking at a being who had looked into the abyss of his own soul and the soul of his entire species and had not flinched. The truth did not set Xyler free. It annihilated him. He saw the universe not as a grand stage for honor and glory, but as a cold, meaningless void, indifferent to his struggles, his code, his pain. His fortress was gone, and the chaos rushed in. He stared at Elia's Thorn, the quiet man from a broken species, and he saw the smiling, placid face of the abyss itself. He opened his mandibles to scream, but the only thing that came out was a soft, dry, rattling sound, the sound of a thing that was already dead on the inside. The aftermath of the rite of unveiling was a thick, horrified silence that smothered the grand conclave. The holographic feed from the Chamber of Echoes had shown it all. It had not been a debate or a duel. It had been a deconstruction. The delegates had watched as Xyler, a pillar of the council, a being of immense pride and unshakable conviction, was systematically unmade, his very essence dismantled by the quiet, precise words of the human ambassador. When the medical team entered the chamber, they found Xyler slumped in his chair. His bronze carapace, once gleaming with martial pride, seemed dull and lifeless. His eyes, usually burning with intensity, were vacant, staring at a point somewhere beyond the dark walls, beyond the station, beyond the known universe. He was physically unharmed, but his mind, his spirit, had been shattered into irreparable pieces. He offered no resistance as they led him away, his heavy feet shuffling on the floor. The only sound he made was a soft, repetitive clicking of his mandibles, an empty, mechanical echo of his once fierce pronouncements. He would occasionally whisper a single word, in his own tongue and in Galactic Common. Stillness. He was lost in the terrible, silent void that Thorn had revealed to him. The Cathar delegation was in disarray, overcome with a mixture of shame and a new, more profound terror. Their greatest champion had not been defeated. He had been erased. They recalled their delegate and withdrew from council proceedings, their official statement citing a need for internal reassessment. The truth was they were running scared. In the conclave, fear had finally curdled into something colder and more pragmatic, a sense of absolute crisis. The delegates no longer whispered about Thorn in the corridors. They held frantic emergency caucuses behind shielded doors. "What is he?" demanded the Grok delegate, its subsonic rumble shaking the very walls of its chamber. "No being should have such power. He wields truth as a weapon of annihilation." "He used no technology," chirped an avian scholar, its feathers ruffled in agitation. "There was no psychic attack, no pheromonal agent. The right sensors would have detected it. He used only perception, empathy, and words." "And that," pulsed Lumina, the Silan, its light a somber, deep indigo, "is what makes him so dangerous. We have defenses against energy weapons. We have shields against kinetic attacks. We have protocols to counter economic and political pressure. We have no defense against a being who can turn your own soul against you." He did not defeat Xyler with a lie. He defeated him with a truth Xyler could not bear to live with. How do you shield yourself from that? The chilling logic of the Silan's statement settled over them all. Elia's Thorn was not a conventional threat. He could not be fought, contained, or negotiated with using any of their established methods. To fight him on his terms was to risk the same fate as Xyler. To ignore him was to allow his silent, corrosive influence to continue dissolving the foundations of their union. He represented an existential threat of a kind they had never conceived of. He was not a warrior or a politician. He was a philosophical plague. They were trapped. To kill him or harm him would surely invite the wrath of his species, a species they now understood to be capable of producing such an individual. And what would that wrath look like? Would it be fleets of warships, or would it be 1,000 more Elia's thorns whispering their certainties into oblivion? The thought was too terrifying to contemplate. They could not send him home. To return him would be to admit defeat, to show a species they barely knew that their most ancient traditions and most powerful delegates could be broken by a single, unarmed representative. It would be an invitation for further exploitation. They could not let him stay. His very presence was a catalyst for fear and instability. He had, in a matter of weeks, brought the 6,000-year-old council to the brink of paralysis. It was a delegate from a species of sentient gas, the Vapori, who proposed the only viable, horrifying solution. We cannot kill him, we cannot release him, and we cannot abide him. Therefore, he must be isolated. Not as a punishment, not as a declaration of hostility, but as a quarantine. We must treat him as we would a new, incurable, and highly contagious disease. The idea was seized upon with the desperate relief of beings who had found the least terrible of a series of awful options. They would confine him, for the safety of the galactic community. They chose the most secure and isolated facility known to the Council, the Asylum on Xylos, a barren moon orbiting a black hole. It was not a prison for criminals, but a sanctuary for the cosmically insane, beings who had gazed into temporal paradoxes, minds that had been shattered by contact with extra-dimensional entities, entities whose very thoughts could unravel the fabric of reality. It was the only place they could think of that might be able to contain him. A small, heavily armed delegation was sent to inform Thorn of their decision. They expected resistance, anger, threats. They found him in his Spartan quarters, standing before the large viewport looking out at the endless starfield. He turned as they entered, his face as calm and neutral as the day he had arrived. The council president, speaking through a remote drone for safety, delivered the verdict. Ambassador Elias Thorn, by unanimous decree of the Galactic Council, you are deemed a clear and present existential threat to the stability of this union. You will be remanded into custody and transported to a secure facility where you will remain indefinitely. This is not a punitive action, but a measure of quarantine for the preservation of galactic order. Thorn listened, his head tilted slightly. There was no flicker of surprise in his eyes, no tightening of his jaw. He seemed to have been expecting it. I understand, he said, his voice level. It is a logical, if temporary, solution. His compliance was the final, most profound horror. He accepted his fate not like a prisoner, but like a chess master accepting a predictable move from his opponent. He seemed to see it as just one more step in a game whose rules only he understood. He did not protest. He did not resist. He simply walked with the guards, his hands clasped behind his back, a picture of serene cooperation. The journey to Xylos was silent. Thorn sat in the transport vessel, a still point in a universe of frantic fear. The asylum was a sterile, white structure, built half underground to shield it from the gravitational distortions of the nearby black hole. It was a place of profound silence and padded walls, of energy fields designed to dampen psychic and reality-bending abilities. It was the most secure containment facility ever built. They led him to his cell. It was more like a comfortable room, a bed, a desk, a sanitation unit, and one wall that was a one-way observational window. There were no sharp corners. The air was filtered, the light soft. It was a place designed to soothe a broken mind. The asylum's warden, a being with a crystalline brain and 6 multi-jointed limbs, watched from the observation chamber as Thorn entered his new home. The human walked to the center of the room, surveyed it for a moment, and then sat on the edge of the bed. He sat as he had stood in the conclave, perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. He looked like a statue, a man waiting patiently for a train. Weeks turned into months. The council tried to return to normal, but the shadow of the human ambassador lingered. The name Elias Thorn was never spoken, but his ghost haunted every debate. The empty human plinth in the conclave was a constant reminder of their fear, of their weakness. Delegate Xyler remained in a catatonic state, a living monument to the humans' power. The Cathar Imperium had sealed its borders. Cracks were appearing in the Great Union. Lumina the Silan took to reviewing the Asylum logs, obsessed with understanding the entity they had caged. The reports were all the same. Subject, Thorn, Elias, status, compliant, non-communicative, he ate the food provided. He slept for precisely 8 hours each cycle. For the rest of the time, he either sat on his bed or stood at the observational window, staring out at a blank, padded wall as if he could see the stars through it. He never raged, never despaired, never showed any sign of mental distress. He was perfectly, maddeningly sane. One cycle, as Lumina watched the live feed, Thorn did something different. He had been sitting on his bed for hours, utterly still. Then slowly he lifted his head and looked directly at the hidden camera that broadcast the feed. He looked directly at Lumina, miles and light years away. There was no malice in his eyes. There was only that same, terrible, knowing sadness. And for a fleeting, soul-freezing instant, Lumina felt it, that same piercing perception that Xyler must have felt. The sense of being seen, understood, and deconstructed down to its core axioms of logic. It felt the fragile lattice of its crystalline mind begin to vibrate with a terrifying resonance, threatening to shatter. Lumina recoiled, cutting the feed, its own light flickering in panic. The truth crashed down upon the Silan, and through it, upon the rest of the council who still dared to think about him. They had not solved the problem. They had not contained the threat. They had made their fear manifest, giving it a name and a place. They hadn't locked a monster in a cage. They had taken the most dangerous being they had ever encountered, a being who could dismantle civilizations with a whisper, and they had given him exactly what he needed. Time to observe, time to learn, time to wait. They had put a key in a lock, and out there, in the silent darkness of the galaxy, the rest of humanity was waiting to find out what door it would open. The dread was not over. It had just been given a home,